Immanuel Kant was born on the 22nd of April in 1724 in the city of Königsberg, um, which back then belonged to Prussia. And Kant is quite famous for never having left Königsberg, but still, that doesn't mean that he only lived a narrow provincial life. Um, because for one, he was quite interested in the wider world and liked to read journals of people's journey around the world. And on the other hand, Königsberg was a diverse city. It was one of Prussia's biggest cities. It was one of the three university cities of Prussia. It had not just a German population, but there were Poles and Baltic people and a Jewish community and tradesmen from the Netherlands or Scandinavia or from England. In fact, some of Kant's very best friends in later life were English tradesmen who had settled down in Königsberg. And that allowed Kant to, despite not getting around much, developing a certain cosmopolitanism and a wide pluralistic perspective. Kant grew up in very simple conditions. His father was a small craftsman. He was a Riemer in German. That is someone who makes belts and straps from leather. Um, and what is important is that his parents were pietists. Pietism was a Protestant reform movement, which was quite prominent in Germany in the age of Aufklärung, and which was unhappy with the Protestant orthodoxy and with just going to church and just listening to whatever the pastor says. And which wanted to have a religion of the heart, an actual lived religion, an actual individual connection with God. Um, Kant wasn't a pietist in later life, and he was critical in later life of pietism. And to be sure, there were hypocritical people and fanatical people and enthusiastic people among the pietists, but still Kant always retained a certain respect and appreciation for the true, the honest pietism of simple people like his parents who really try to just being good Christs. And his parents were quite influential on him. His father seems to have been a very righteous, hardworking, honest person who tried to pass these virtues on to his children and seems to largely have succeeded. And his mother was a very warm-hearted woman who was very pious on the one hand, and also on the other hand very much interested and appreciative of nature. She went with the young boy Kant outside of the city, showing him the various plants. She pointed out to him the stars and the cosmos, and she is largely responsible for Kant's lifelong interest in nature. He was very much interested in natural science, and also for his appreciation for nature and the purposiveness of nature. The, so to say, the hand of God showing in the way nature is made up. Well, Kant went to the Collegium Fridericianum, which was a pietist high school in Königsberg, and he lost his parents quite early, especially his mother, who died when he was 13, and his father also died when he was like 22. So he did study in Königsberg, but after that he had to work as what is called Hauslehrer for some years. So that was quite common back then. We find that in many biographies of the great German thinkers and poets of the time. that a student, when finished with his studies, but when he hadn't really found a place for himself, hadn't really started a career yet, would live with some family, with some bourgeois or noble family to teach their children. That's also the only extended time Kant spent outside of Königsberg, so he still stayed in the border area of the city. But then he came back to Königsberg, and in 1755 he became a magister, today we would say master. And from then on, for about 40 years, he would teach at the university in Königsberg. In 1770, after already teaching for 15 years, he would become professor for metaphysics and logic. And Kant, at first, while always being quite an independent thinker, still was quite influenced by the rationalistic philosophy of the Leibniz-Wolffian school, which was prominent back then in Germany. But in the 1760s, he increasingly became unhappy with that. He increasingly came to the conviction that this philosophy promises lots of things, like being able to give a proof for God's existence, but can't really deliver. So he came to be convinced that philosophy had to undergo a thorough criticism. You had to first do a critique of reason to see what reason can and can't do, before just blindly using reason and just blindly starting to philosophize. And this is what leads to the so-called silent decade of Kant. Because from about 1770, when he started his professorship, to 1781, when his critique of pure reason was first published, he tried to go deeper with his thoughts, to bring order into his thoughts, and to develop his critical system. And in this period, he almost published nothing. Before that, he had published some things and made a name of himself as a philosopher in Germany. But now in this decade, he only published a few short essays, not even 100 pages altogether, before bringing out his critique of pure reason. And of course, today Kant is mainly famous for his three critiques: the critique of pure reason, the critique of practical reason, and the critique of the power of judgment, which is also why his philosophical work is divided into the pre-critical period and the critical period. And the critical period was much more productive, which we can see in the fact that in his collected works, which make up 9 volumes, only the first 2 volumes contain pre-critical writings, and the rest contain critical writings. I would divide his critical period into three distinct periods. The 1780s are mainly spent on his critical project. At first, he just wanted to publish the critique of pure reason, but it wasn't well received, it wasn't well understood at first, so he would publish smaller introductory writings to make it better understood. He would also publish a second edition in which he changed and rewrote many passages so it could be better understood. But also, even though at first he had only planned one critique, he realized that wasn't enough, and there was also a critique of practical reason and a critique of the power of judgment needed. And therefore he published them in 1788 and 1790. But with that, his critical project was done. He also said as much in the introduction to the critique of the power of judgment, and he turned to other endeavors. I would say that the first half of the 90s, of the 1790s, is spent with the conflict of the faculties. That is the title of one of Kant's works, but the topic of that work is also something that other works, other essays of that time are concerned with. Back then, universities were split into the lower faculty, the philosophical faculty, and the three higher faculties. The faculty of theology, the faculty of jurisprudence or law, and the faculty of medicine. And Kant deals with the conflict that may arise between philosophy and these other three, mainly the first two, mainly theology and jurisprudence. The conflict with medicine is more of a sideshow. But these two conflicts, they have a historical background. Because the conflict with theology is mainly about can we, through pure reason, arrive at religion or at certain truths about God, or is it needed that we have belief in the Bible, in revelation, in what the priesthood tells us? And this conflict was relevant because under Frederick the Great, the former Prussian king, there had been great religious tolerance and there had been no censorship when it came to religious matters. But now, in the 90s, there was a new king, Frederick William II, and under him there was a new censorship established. Kant also got into conflict with this censorship because of his religious writings. And then on the other hand, the conflict with the jurists is about the question, is man evil and rotten and at his core and will always stay that way? Therefore, is it necessary to have a cynical real politics which doesn't care necessarily about what is right? Or is it possible for things to ever get better? Is it possible that we will ever have a perpetual peace or a rational republic? And that is a conflict that arose and that Kant discussed in light, of course, of the French Revolution of 1789, of which Kant was a great supporter. But then in the second half of the 90s, Kant was increasingly getting old and getting weaker. Therefore, after about 40 years, he stopped giving his lectures, he stopped his work as a professor, and he turned to trying to, well, basically finish his philosophical life's work. So he tried to publish the lectures that he had given for 4 decades as books. So he only managed to do so with his lectures on anthropology. He already was too old and too weak to do that with his lectures on physical geography, on logic, and on pedagogy. Therefore, he gave the notes to 2 of his friends and students to turn the notes into books. Unfortunately, they didn't do the greatest job, and these 3 books cannot fully be taken as authentic books of Kant. And on the other hand, Kant wanted to finish his philosophical system because the critique, as he had done in his 3 critiques, was never meant to be the actual philosophy. It was just the fundament of philosophy, because you first have to critique reason before you can apply it and use it to arrive at philosophical truth. Well, actual philosophy to Kant has 2 parts. Theoretical philosophy, dealing with what is, dealing with nature, and practical philosophy, dealing with freedom and with what ought to be, dealing with morality. And therefore, he tried in these last years to write on both of them. He published Metaphysics of Morals to deal with one half of philosophy. And as for the other half, he worked on a work which was meant to connect the metaphysical fundaments, the metaphysical groundworks of natural science with physics, with actual empirical natural science. So he didn't manage to finish that work. And In his very last years, Kant became increasingly weak due to old age. He complained that he wasn't really having any pains. He could still eat and sleep. So he would say that his vegetative functions were still working. But he complained about what he called a pressure on the head or a pressure on the brain, which made it impossible for him to do any intellectual work. Increasingly, his mind would betray him. Increasingly, he would have a harder time remembering things. In the end, he didn't even recognize very close friends. So it was quite a sad end for such an eminent thinker. And then in 1804, so a short time before he would have turned 80, Kant died. That is a brief overview over his life. If you want to know more about that, if you want to hear me go into more detail, I also have a longer lecture on Kant's life.